All right, welcome to episode 4 of the Agendas podcast. I'm your host, Harry Steele, together with Ben. We're a little bit under the weather today, but we're going to push through for the podcast. Ben, how was your weekend so far?
Pretty good, except for I got sick. But I really enjoyed the Lakers game. I enjoyed the Sixers game. Yeah, I'm having a good time.
All right, let's get into that. Let's start with the Lakers game. As you probably know by now, unless you're living under a rock, the Lakers are down 0-3 to Denver again. Last year, obviously, they got swept by Denver. This year, people thought it might be different. You had some analysts, specifically Nick Wright, thinking that this was the year that the Lakers were going to be able to overcome, and it just hasn't been the case. They lost the first two on the road in Denver, which is not a surprise. The home team usually wins, especially game one. Game two, even not a shocker, but, sometimes the series turns around when you get back home, and especially that game three is usually a big one. Even if a team is down 0-2, usually they'll give a push game three desperation. The other team is up 2-0. They're not so concerned, and they'll make a run for it. But the Denver Nuggets kind of slammed the door on the series last night. Ben, what were your big takeaways from the game?
I mean, a couple things. First of all, I think that's kind of what happened. If you look how how it came out, the Lakers came out 8-0 and really just had all the energy and momentum through that first half as the team who was in desperation mode. And the Nuggets were kind of it felt like they were chilling. But then you look at halftime, they're down by 4 points. So I think kind of the theory of, the mentalities of up 0-2 versus down 0-2 team happened. Just the Nuggets are that much better. It basically didn't actually do anything in terms of results. That energy shift didn't really do anything in terms of results. That's just how much of a gap there is. So that's kind of my micro takeaway. My macro takeaway is, listen, I haven't been following basketball for that long, but people like to act like LeBron James has had no drop-off. We're in year 27, 37, whatever year it is, and he's basically just as good as prime LeBron. Now, like I said, I haven't watched basketball that much for a long time. I didn't really watch a lot of prime LeBron, so I don't know. But if you're telling me this guy's the same as prime LeBron, then we got to reconsider where prime LeBron ranks in terms of an all-time player. Or you have to come off that he's just not prime LeBron, because that guy was irrelevant for basically outside of just trying to force some transition buckets. That guy basically did nothing.
Well, I'm going to stop you right there. I think people have accepted this is not quite prime LeBron. I think
Okay,
there's a
but
massive. I think.
at what
Go
point
ahead.
did it drop off? Because we've been saying this for years. Oh, he's old, but he's the same player. At what point did that shift?
I mean, in 2020, obviously they won the championship. LeBron used to be an Iron Man. He was one of those guys that was going to
So
play
in
82
2020, he was
games.
prime LeBron. 2020 was the same as prime LeBron. Just because they won the
No, even
championship
even
doesn't
from
mean he was
that
prime
point,
LeBron.
I think it wasn't quite a downturn. I think the ultimate peak LeBron was in Miami, probably back in 2013, what people say is his best year. I mean, obviously there's levels to it, different levels of health and everything like that. But yeah, LeBron used to be an Iron Man, and ever since he came to LA, he's kind of missed games here and there. There was no injury excuse for this. The Lakers are 100% healthy, but I don't think anyone's comparing this to prime LeBron James. He's especially defensively, he's not there. And LeBron used to have what Jokic kind of has now, which is that ability to control the basketball game. There's a certain presence. There's a certain we're going at my pace. If the other team scores a bucket, we're going to get right back at them, and kind of an ability to dominate a basketball game. And that's kind of what made LeBron special in his peak, is that ability to kind of pace everything. And Jokic kind of has that now, where Jokic even it doesn't always feel like he's in a rush, but he kind of has that pace, that ability to control the game, to get his teammates involved. If they need a bucket, he can go get a bucket, but he's not the guy that necessarily is taking 25 shots in a game. He'll kind of see the flow of the game and how things are going and kind of get his when necessary. Even last night, it didn't feel like a big Jokic game. It didn't really feel like a big anything game for the Nuggets outside of Aaron Gordon. Aaron Gordon was phenomenal last night. I think he had 29 and 15. And I think LeBron might have even been guarding him in that game, and Aaron Gordon kind of just bullied him. He had that energy. He brought it last night. And, without him, do they win that game? I'm not sure. But that's the beauty of a Nuggets team with so many potential options, so many guys that can go off. And that's what makes them a great team.
Yeah, I think that's also another thing that I noticed from this game. I mean, obviously this was a huge Aaron Gordon game, and I think in general, watching this series, Aaron Gordon is a really big part of what they do offensively. Obviously, everyone focuses on the Jokic Murray pairing and the pick and roll and all that, but I think Aaron Gordon is a big part of. He is what elevates that pick and roll. When that pick and roll gets sniffed out or that kind of gets shut down, he's there on the periphery ready to jump in because usually you're gonna have to commit extra help to kind of shut that down, and he's always there to take advantage of it. And I think that little bit extra really is a big part of what is an underappreciated part of why the Nuggets offense is so good.
100%. He's been massive for them. He was the high draft pick down in Orlando. People kind of thought he was a bust, or he wasn't living up to the hype, and they traded him to Denver. And again, that's another beauty of Jokic almost, that he kind of makes people fit their roles. Everyone, not to discredit Aaron Gordon. Aaron Gordon's accepted his role and he's played great. He's brought the energy, he's brought the rebounding, the defense, everything. But Jokic is an easy player to play with, and he makes players around him better. I know that's a term that's thrown around, a little bit too much for my taste. That they make players better. Just because you get assists doesn't mean you make players better. But if you watch, the Denver Nuggets, he definitely elevates his teammates, and I think it's time. I know people obviously already talked about this, but Jokic in the all-time conversations is getting very, very serious. In terms of an offensive player, I've been following the basketball. I'm not going to act like I've been following basketball for, 100 years or so, but I've been following basketball for a while, and I know the history of the NBA. And as far as an offensive player, I don't know if there's any player that you can definitively argue this guy is a better offensive player than Nikola Jokic. Not that he definitively is the best offensive player of all time, but he definitely has a case. I mean, in terms of a score, the efficiency is definitely there. He's not necessarily the volume scorer of some other players, but I think that's kind of how he chooses to play. He's not going to say I'm a scorer and let me take 30 shots like a Kobe Bryant or a Michael Jordan or something like that. He kind of picks his spots. So I don't think he's the greatest scorer ever, but when you factor in the playmaking, when you factor in the elevation of the teammates, offensive rebound, we watched last night, Ben, and there was 4 or 5, or I don't know if it was 4 or 5, but definitely 2 or 3 offensive rebounds. He kind of just, tips it right in, no problem. His touch around the rim is phenomenal. And I think it's time to have a conversation that is Nikola Jokic the greatest offensive player of all time. He definitely has a case.
Yeah, I mean he from what I see, he's a very strong inevitability to his offense, where his offense is not helped or assisted. I mean, obviously in terms of winning, it is, but in terms of him ability to score, it's not assisted by scheme or players around him. He's beating anybody one on one. We've seen him consistently do that to Anthony Davis the whole series. And if you come and double him, he probably could still beat that too, or he could just pass out of it. But whatever. This gets into conversation when you look at like Steph Curry, where I believe if Steph Curry was drafted into some pick and roll offense, he would be a great player, but he would not be anywhere close to what we consider him today. So I really feel like the scheme really assists Steph, and he works on this all-time level in this scheme, where as opposed to Jokic, I think he basically just runs pick and roll. You can put that on any NBA team, and he's going to be just as good offensively.
100%. I think he runs a little bit more than pick and roll. Obviously, they put him in the post, and he can play make out of there, and things like that.
Okay, the post,
Um,
but we're not running him around fancy screens and this and that to get him open. He's just
100%. I think that's one of Steph's strength is his ability to run off the ball. I think he definitely found a system that works for him, and that's part of sports in general, particularly in football. Is just pretty people players can be scheme dependent. Obviously Steph's threat to shoot the basketball is greater than anyone we've ever seen, and that kind of helps him in that situation when he's running around screens. People got to chase him and things like that. Now, Steph's peak is definitely up there as one of the greatest peaks of all time. I think Nikola Jokic's peak is just flat out better. Steph Curry, obviously from a shooting standpoint, it's the greatest ever. But when you factor in the playmaking, Steph is a great playmaker, but Jokic is better. When you factor in the offensive rebounding, and things like that, I'll just take a prime Jokic over a prime Steph Curry from what I've seen. It might be recency bias. I don't think it is. We'll see if Jokic can finish out this finals run, because obviously, if they lost in the finals or pre the finals, he's only got one championship, so he definitely has to add to his resume in terms of accomplishments and things like that. But in terms of an eye test, he's definitely up there. And I think, Ben, do you have anything you wanted to add to that?
yeah. I mean, for sure, yeah. He's got to win the chip this year at minimum, because otherwise he's just a one chip player. That's like whatever kind of this whole conversation goes out the window a little bit. But yeah, I don't think back to comparing it to Steph. I mean, whatever. I don't think it's. I mean, I'm definitely taking this over any version of Steph, even considering Steph, meaning Steph existed in a perfect system for Steph, and even still, I would take Jokic over him. So if Steph just existed in some random pick and roll offense, uh, I don't think he would be able to even have the peak that he did have, and even the peak that he did have in the perfect system, I still am taking Jokic over that.
I definitely hear that. I want to see Jokic also play out for 5 to 10 years, because you kind of see the ebbs and flows. I remember a couple years back, people were like, "Oh, is this going to be the Giannis era?" And Ben, we don't have to get into Giannis right now. Let's not do that right now. But people were thought it's going to be the Giannis era. He's a young player. He's the best player in the world, great offensively, defensively, rebounding, everything. He won a title against the Suns with a historic 50-point performance, and people are like, "Is Giannis ever going to lose again?" And situations happen, injuries happen, underperformances happen, et cetera, et cetera. And now it's kind of Jokic took over, so things can change very quickly in the NBA, which is why I like to see a larger sample size. I'm not a huge longevity guy in terms of this guy played 15 years and this guy played 12 years. That doesn't really make a difference to me, but I would like to see a 10 to 12-year peak of Jokic, and I think we'll get to see that, and it's a beautiful thing to watch. It's a very easy game to watch. It's enjoyable, especially if a newer fan is starting to watch the NBA. It's very exciting, and it's very easy to see his greatness on a simple level and in terms of a complexity level. And the other game that was last night, I think I want to get into a little bit, is the 76ers versus the Knicks. Joel Embiid's been dealing with his injuries, obviously. I think he had something wrong with his face where his eye was drooping a little bit. He's obviously got the knee issues, and he had that dirty play, which, I definitely think was dirty. I don't know if they should have ejected him for not whatever it was, but he ended up having 50 points on 19 shots, which is unbelievable. That was obviously a must-win game. And again, that's what we talked about earlier. A team is down 2-0, you know, going back to their house. Game 3 is that must-win game. They got to win it. They're more desperate than the other team. And I think Joel Embiid, this was a big performance in terms of him putting the team on his back and saying, no, we're not losing this game. And you haven't seen many of those games from Joel Embiid in the past, so it was nice to see, that regular season level performance that he's played with, bringing it on to the postseason, Ben.
Yeah, just to touch on the ejection, I mean, no star player is getting ejected for that in the playoffs. Yeah, obviously it was flagrant, whatever, flagrant run. They're not ejecting anybody for that in the playoffs, so that just is what it is. Unless maybe Draymond Green, okay, but that's about it. Um, and then in terms of what I've noticed about Embiid, at least, I mean, I think I only watched the third game. I don't think I saw the first two, but he's a lot, whatever. He's consistently been nagged by injuries, and those have caused him to miss time and things like that. That game felt like he had some of that nagging stuff going on, and he's like, I'm playing anyways. It felt like he's got a little bit more. I'm gonna put it up a little more grit, a little more pain tolerance. I'm gonna keep playing. Yeah, whenever Embiid's at his best, he's gonna have points on not a lot of shots because he gets fouled every 2 seconds. And at this point, I would expect, partly because of the Sixers, but partly because I'm not so high on the Knicks, I would expect Philadelphia to win the series at this point.
That's interesting that you think the Sixers are winning the series at this point. I think they have the best player in the series. I don't know how healthy Joel Embiid is. He definitely played great last game, but they don't have home court advantage either. So game 4 is the same thing. It's a must win. I don't think they're coming back from 3-1. It's definitely possible that they win game 4, and if they win game 4, it's a brand new series. That's the advantage of home court. I think home court has been a massive advantage in these playoffs. But yeah, when you have the best player on the court, you definitely give yourself a chance to win that series. And especially with Tyrese Maxey, the potential for him to go for a 30, 40, 50-point game, he definitely has that in there. And if the Sixers can get past New York, I don't see any team that, outside of the Celtics in the East that they can't beat. And I would love to see a Sixers Celtics conference finals.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. They're not coming back from 3-1, so they do need to win game 4. I just think they're going to do it. Um, this game was a super slow paced game, and they just kept going back and forth with the Knicks 2-2, 3-3, 2-3, whatever. There wasn't really any big runs in the game, and eventually they kind of just pulled away a little bit. I don't really see why that wouldn't happen again. But yeah, definitely game 4 is a must win for the Sixers. Beyond that, I don't really know. I mean, part of this is I'm just not in on the Knicks. I just don't think they're legitimately that good championship level, even finals appearance level team.
I definitely hear that. And the thing about the Knicks, obviously, they're missing Julius Randle, which people say Julius Randle is kind of a hit or miss in the playoffs, mostly a miss.
Julius Randle is a
Um,
garbage can. I don't care about Julius Randle.
okay, I definitely
I
hear
mean,
that.
he's
The
a
only
good
thing is
player or whatever, but
what Julius Randle brings to the table is a second creator, kind of. I mean, he's a power forward, so it's a little bit interesting. But the way the Knicks kind of built their team, which is smart, it's kind of how I wish the Hawks would have built their team, and Ben can get into that if he wants to. But they have their star guard who's an elite scorer, and he's short though, so he's not going to play great defense. So they just surrounded him with tall wings who can shoot the three, space the floor, kind of help him out defensively. And it's been really smart. But in the playoffs, especially in a half court setting, which it comes down to a lot of the time, which we've talked about before, you kind of need multiple creators. You can't, Brunson, I think even last night might have had 30 or 35 plus points, whatever it was. But without anyone else to kind of get in with him, it's like, oh, the Sixers are kind of okay with Jalen Brunson, go get your 30, and we'll kind of contain everyone else. No one else can really create their own shot. So we can kind of live with that, unless Brunson's going to have a monster game, you know. I think they'll take that, and that's kind of how the Knicks have built their team, which is, it's going to be interesting in the offseason. The Knicks do have a lot of draft picks and, trade possibilities. Could they bring in that second star? I know people have talked about Donovan Mitchell. I don't know how much sense that would make in the backcourt with Jalen Brunson, but I think, if the Knicks are going to get to that championship level, I think they're going to have to bring a secondary creator on some level.
Yeah, totally agree with that. Yeah, Donovan Mitchell makes no sense. Just has the Hawks how two small guards works together. But yeah, I mean, also Jalen Brunson isn't really like Jalen Brunson. First of all, it felt like Jalen Brunson. I mean, eye test wise, I don't know what the percentage was. It felt like that dude basically didn't miss a shot last night. So he's getting his 30 on super efficient, I would imagine. But it doesn't really feel like he's ever going to go for 50. You know what I'm saying? Like he goes off, it's like 35, whatever. Um,
Well, I think he did have a 60-point game in the regular season, but again, I remember there was a game last year, Nuggets Suns, where the Suns were kind of like, hey, Jokic, get your points, and we'll guard everyone else. And Jokic had 50, I think, and they still lost because that's not a sustainable way to win in the playoffs. You need to get multiple players involved. Well, let's jump into that game, actually. Let's jump into the Suns. They lost game two. They're down 0-2, which is a bit surprising to me. I'm not going to lie. I'm pretty surprised. They've been struggling to score the basketball, which I guess shouldn't be such a surprise. The Timberwolves had the number one defense in the NBA. In the playoffs, it comes down to half-court basketball, and they just haven't been able to do much. A lot of ISO basketball, which can work at times, but it's not really a sustainable way to play. And Anthony Edwards didn't even have a great game. I think he shot a really low percentage, only had 10 or 15 points, but it didn't matter. They kind of shut down the Suns, and now it's 2-0. The Timberwolves serve home court. Um, Not that I don't think the series is over because you win your two home games. The Suns go back home, win games 3 and 4, and it's a series again, which we saw last year with the Nuggets Suns, which I think they were down 0-2 and then they won game 3 or 4 at home. They ended up losing the series, but they go home, win game 3, and see what happens. But the Suns are going to have to pick it up offensively. Devin Booker said before the season, I don't know who's going to guard us, and it seems like the answer is Jaden McDaniels. He's been shutting them down. Kevin Durant did not do much last game. Devin Booker hasn't been much of a factor. And to lose a game where Anthony Edwards struggles offensively, and it was kind of the same story as game one. How you had a close game going to mid third quarter, and the Timberwolves kind of just pull away. They get some get some steals, transition buckets. Their bread and butter is that defense. Rudy Gobert has been phenomenal. So Ben, what do you think about this series? Do you think it's over? The Suns going down 0-2, going back home, or you still give the Suns a shot?
First of all, I want to touch on Anthony Edwards. This is a classic Steph Curry 2020 finals run. Anthony Edwards just had a game with 12 points. And the first game he had a great game, but then this game he had 12 points and they still won. So he just got carried. But no one's going to talk about that that they're winning games when he had 12 points. If they do anything, it's going to be all Anthony Edwards is this and that. So I just got to say that.
So Ben, going down 0-2, the Suns at home, they've struggled offensively. Minnesota's kind of had their number, unlike the regular season where the Suns kind of scored pretty easily and beat them 3 straight times. Do you give the Suns a chance going back home, or do you feel the series is kind of a wrap at this point?
I'll be very surprised. I mean, if the Suns win the next two, then we could get back to them winning the series. I mean, outside of whatever, there's the regular season success they've had against them. I don't know what's changed. Obviously, playoff basketball is a lot different, but beyond that, I see no indication that they're going to be able to do anything. They haven't been able to score. Kind of the Suns' offense is basically mismatches. Is basically kind of their offensive strategy. And that's not really working against this Minnesota team. This might be a 4-game series, to be honest.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you've lost all confidence. That's fair. We'll see what happens.
Scoring 92 points a game, like, what do you think is going to happen?
100%. Playoffs can kind of be like that, where every game you lose kind of feels like the end of the series. And, I'm not saying it's not. It's potential that, the Timberwolves sweep the Suns. I would be surprised about that just because a sweep usually means like the team is just that much better. And I don't view the Timberwolves as just, a significantly dominant team over the Suns. So, I think the Suns definitely get a game. I think they win game 3 tonight. And then we'll go from there. If they lose game 3 tonight, it's very possible they get swept, but we'll just have to see how it goes. And then the other series was the Clippers-Mavericks. Game 2, the Mavericks kind of stormed back. Luka has a big game, as we kind of predicted. We knew they wouldn't shut down Luka the whole series. The big story of the game was Kawhi comes back, doesn't really play that much. Kind of got it going a little bit later in the game, but I think he only finished with 15 points. So Ben, what are your takeaways on the game? With Kawhi coming back, Luka having the big game, and the Mavericks tying up the series.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really see this as a big Luka game. I'm sure the counting stats are what they are. I didn't think he particularly had the game where this was the game that Luka carried the franchise, and so you're just going to lose that game. So I think the Mavs still have that game in the bag at some point. So I don't think the Clippers have, already gotten through that game. I think that game's still coming. But I mean, yeah, I mean Kawhi was terrible, but he was the first game off the injury. I mean, this feels like it almost feels like a defensive series, which is surprising based off of the players on the court. But I could say at this point, I see this as the best series because it's the most even series between the two best teams. Like Sixers Knicks is even, but I just think both those teams have a ceiling. Whereas these two, it's a very even series between two teams that I could think could, and at least in a dream scenario, could make a finals appearance. Um, so I'm gonna enjoy watching this one.
100%. I'm with you on that. I think it's going to be a 6 or 7 game series. I think that's always what it was going to be. You have star players. Kawhi is back. Luka. I don't think he had a 40 or 50 point game. He had like 30 points, but he had some big runs. You're definitely right. There's always that 40 or 50 point potential Luka game on the table. Kyrie hasn't had a great game, but as we talked about before the playoffs, I think in episode 1, Kyrie has not been some great playoff performer that people talk about him. He's had that 2016 finals, obviously, where he was fantastic. In 2017, he was very good as well. But in terms of his whole as a playoff, option, he hasn't been that star player that he's been in the regular season necessarily, which is a little bit surprising. Being with his offense created on mid-range jumpers and creating your own shot, not something that typically gets shut down in the playoffs. Usually it's elevated, but he just hasn't been quite that guy. I don't think home court is
Really,
some
I thought
massive.
eye test wise game two he was elite. Even and he doesn't come out with 40 points, but every bucket you're like, oh my gosh.
The eye test wise is always going to be there 100%. I think even game 1 he might have had 30 points when they're kind of out of it already. So I shouldn't say he hasn't done anything. He's been okay. But we haven't had that
He had
Kyrie.
the Lagar he had the garbage time points.
Yeah, he had some garbage time points. I don't know if it was completely garbage time, but they were down by a bunch at that point. So I'm waiting for that big Kyrie series where he kind of averages 30 or very efficient, things of that nature to kind of. I think if he's able to turn it up to that next level, I think they can definitely close out the Clippers. But again, I think it's going to be a 6 or 7 game series. I don't think home court advantage is going to be some massive thing in this series where the Clippers are going to go back or the Mavericks are going to go back home and it's going to be 3-1. I think they probably split in Dallas just like they did in Los Angeles, and it's going to go all the way down to the wire. But we'll have to see. This is a big turning point in terms of a big NBA moment where there's two teams and they can kind of go both directions. The Clippers, obviously, if they lose this series, losing in the first round, do they run it back with Kawhi and Paul George? I think Paul George is a free agent this year, or maybe he has a player option. Or do they get rid of Paul George? There's a lot of implications based off this series. If Luka loses again, does he want out of Dallas at some point? Consistently not making it far into the playoffs. We'll have to see how it goes. But I think it should be a fun series and go all the way down to the wire. Ben, let's get into some NFL. The NFL draft was last night, or at least round 1. People act like the whole NFL draft is round 1, but that's okay. We do that too sometimes here. Um, Ben, there were some surprising picks, some chalk picks. What was your biggest takeaway from round 1 of the NFL draft?
Okay, here's my biggest takeaway. When we were going into the draft, we're talking about the pass rushers and the corners. And we're like, oh, this guy's really good. This guy's really good. But there's no consensus number one. It's like, oh, this guy's good. Oh, but maybe this guy's better. Oh, maybe with this guy's better. That was kind of going on with those two positions. And then what happens is those two positions don't get taken off the board. I think the first player from, pass rusher or corner was taken at 15. So that just showed when there's not consensus guys, they're not that good. And I think that's kind of what NFL GM showed you. It's like, okay, yeah, there's a lot of guys with traits, but nobody has the whole package and whatever. I'm sure there's guys who are going to be good, but I don't think there's any way to predict it at this point. And I'm happy to see those guys not getting reached for and being taken in the top half of the first round and seeing teams wait on those guys who clearly all of them have holes in their game.
Yeah, I definitely hear what you're saying in terms of when there's no consensus, usually that's not a great sign. You had some of that with the receivers, but it was also kind of like, is this guy, going to be greater than this guy? Not like, I guess we'll take this guy over this guy. You know what I'm saying? In terms
Yeah,
of
exactly.
similar to the
Exactly.
pass rushers, where you had that ceiling with Marvin Harrison. People are saying maybe he's not going to be the first wide receiver off the board. Didn't seem like too much of a dilemma for the Cardinals. But, you have Malik Neighbors. People said maybe he should go ahead of him. He goes to the Giants. Yeah, I agree with you on the pass rushers. They kind of fell down to 15. There wasn't that blue chip prospect. And really through the whole draft, outside of the receivers and quarterbacks, those were kind of the positions of the draft. I guess people thought the tackles. Jim Harbaugh obviously liked himself a tackle at number 5. And Ben, were you shocked? The Chargers got rid of both the receivers, Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. Quentin Johnson was very disappointing in his rookie year. They don't really have anything in terms of receiver with Justin Herbert at quarterback. Obviously, Jim Harbaugh loves his linemen. But were you shocked that they didn't take a receiver at number 5 and they kind of surprised everyone a little bit taking Joe Alt?
I mean, it's kind of become, since the Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow, it's kind of been consensus. It's kind of switched a little bit where it was like, okay, you've got your quarterback, but you've got holes everywhere else. The first thing you go to is tackle. But since Jamar Chase, that's kind of switched to receiver. Um, Apparently, Harbaugh hasn't, changed his mind on that, and he went for tackle. I mean, yeah, I literally couldn't name oh, they've got Palmer and Quentin Johnson. I mean, they've got a couple young guys they drafted a year or two ago with some talent. So it's not like whatever. It's almost like a Packer situation. It's kind of a couple unproven guys with some talent. But allegedly, if you've got the quarterback, it's going to work. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, and they already have a left tackle, so they're moving. Actually, Joe Alt's going to play right tackle. I think they have an All-Pro left. What's his name on the Chargers?
I can't quite
Um,
remember right now.
but they've got a guy. So yeah, it is actually, it is. I do find it pretty puzzling that they didn't go for neighbors.
100%. I didn't love the pick, to be honest. Obviously they like Joe Alt, and if he's a Pro Bowler for the next 10 years, they're not going to hear too much complaints. But Justin Herbert, when he's your star product, he's your number one asset. I'm not a big Justin Herbert guy. I need to see some wins from him, not just big arm and passing yards. I would like to see some wins. But obviously wins is a team stat. But I don't see the Chargers going anywhere without any receivers. I would find it shocking if the Chargers at this point win 10, 11, 12 games. Who's Justin Herbert throwing it to? Obviously he's going to finish with 4,000 plus passing yards in all likelihood, unless Quentin Johnson turns it around or something like that. I would love to see them, take a Malik Neighbors at number 5, or if you're going to take a tackle, maybe trade back, get some extra value so you can take one around 2. People say this is a deep receiver draft, but I didn't love it in all honesty, or maybe see them trade up back into round 1 to pick a receiver. We'll see if they take a receiver rounds 2, 3, or 4, but I think that's a massive need for them. And with Justin Herbert being, your number 1 asset by far in the team, not getting him a number 1 receiver is a little bit shocking to me.
Yeah,
The other big,
Herbert at this point is basically big arm Kirk Cousins. Very little playoff experience, choked the playoff game he was in. Has great regular seasons and a big arm, and basically aesthetic bias, as you like to say. We kind of put Herbert up there at the top of the quarterbacks, even though he kind of feels similar to Kirk Cousins in terms of results.
yeah, I'm with you on that to some degree. You always hear like the GMs love him and the coaches love him, which is fine. He's big, he's got a big arm, et cetera, et cetera. He's got all the traits. But at a certain point, there's some intangible factor, which, is not always the easiest to single out or whatever it is, but you got to win some games. I've seen him in some big moments not deliver, some 2-minute drives down 3 or down 7, whatever it is. You don't have that feeling that you have with Mahomes, where Mahomes is down 3, you just put the points on the board. The goal is, can we hold him to under 7? Can we hold him to that field goal with her? But you don't have that same feeling. And I get he's going to put up the big numbers, and, he's had some times where hasn't had as much help, especially with Mike Williams' injury and whatever it is. But I want to see some results, and it seems like Harbaugh is going to be that smash mouth basketball they brought in, or excuse me, smash mouth football. Bringing in Gus Edwards, Joe Alt, going to be that run and smash you up the middle, team, which is interesting with Justin Herbert as your quarterback. If you're going to run that style of offense, people were saying maybe they should draft J.J. McCarthy and trade Justin Herbert for a big haul. But that was interesting. But again, you don't get rid of a talent like Justin Herbert not this early in his career. But the other surprise of the top 10 was Michael Penix to the Atlanta Falcons. The Atlanta Falcons obviously signed Kirk Cousins to a big contract. It really boils down to a 2-year deal, 2 years with $100 million guaranteed. They can kind of cut him after that. Even after 1 year, it's potential they can get rid of him. But after that big investment, for them to go back into the quarterback market to take Michael Penix in the top 10 was pretty surprising. Our resident Falcons fan, Ben here, I'm sure you have some thoughts on that.
Oh yeah, I mean, first of all, it's interesting. Before this pick was made, it sounded like to me Kirk Cousins was really on a 3-year contract before you're going to cut him. And now suddenly we take a quarterback. It's like, oh, we're going to cut him after 2 years, and it's not going to be any dead cap problems or anything like that. So whatever, I haven't checked the spot track or anything, but whatever, we'll see how that goes.
I
How
think I
they get.
looked it up, and I believe after 2 years, I think there is a cap hit in the third year, but I don't think it's some massive cap hit, especially with the cap keep going up. So I think after two
Like
years it's
10 or like
reasonable.
30.
I don't remember exactly. I don't remember exactly. We can look that up.
But we'll see. I mean, the thing for me is that Adunze was on the board. As I said before, I was out on all the pass rushers and the corners. So, but Adunze was on the board. And that guy, you put that guy with London and Pitts. I mean, whatever. We've been talking about, is Pitts actually even good at football? But you put that guy with London and Pitts, that's pretty dynamic. I mean, basically what it's going to come down to is Penix good? If he's top 10 quarterback when he's playing, this looks like the greatest move of all time. And if he stinks, then probably everybody gets fired, and that is what it is. But what's bothering me is the comps from Penix to Tua, and me and Harry, this is a conversation we started off air, where basically Tua's a good processor, but just has a weak arm. That's what's holding him back. So Penix, in theory, has a good processor with a cannon of an arm. Best arm in the draft outside of Joe Milton. So in theory, that should make an elite quarterback. But getting into the Tua thing, Tua's hole in his game is apparently just his weak arm. That's the only thing. So you think the only difference between Tua and somebody like Joe Burrow, who's also not mobile really, they're equal processors of everything. It's just Joe Burrow can fit more balls in there because of his arm.
I think obviously there is other factors into it in terms of processing, reading the defense. Obviously, we're not breaking down the all 22, so it's a little bit tough for us to know. Joe Burrow compared to Tua, I mean, he's a lot taller. That's for one thing. Easier for him to see over the offensive line, get a better view of the field. He has a much bigger arm as well. That is a massive thing. But in terms of Tua, the comparison, obviously he's lefty and things like that. But I think the main thing is Tua kind of doesn't have that mobility, and he kind of has that weaker arm, and that's where they kind of bring in Michael Penix's Tua with a stronger arm, and I definitely hear that to some degree. Um, but we'll have to see. Again, when I first saw the pick, I hated it. I was like, this is a disaster. The more I think about it, it's not terrible. The only thing I don't really love about it is the age. Michael Penix is already 24 years old. And if you use Kirk Cousins for 2 years and then bring in Michael Penix, his rookie year is going to be when he's 26, which is pretty old. And then the contract, the benefits of the rookie quarterback contract, kind of you don't get as much of an advantage because you have less time on that, especially if he's sitting for 2 years. But again, we'll see how it goes. If he's a good quarterback, I think the Falcons kind of overreacted in terms of the past couple of years. They've had really bad quarterback play with Desmond Ridder and Mariota, and they kind of struggled since Matt Ryan. And they kind of overreacted. We're like, we want that longevity, we want the stability at the quarterback position, which is obviously key in the NFL. You can't win without it. So I definitely get that. They're trying to lock up their future with Penix and Kirk Cousins. So at the end of the day, we'll see how it goes. It's going to depend how Penix turns out. Obviously, as Ben was saying. But did you have any other major takeaways from the NFL draft, or that was kind of it?
I mean, we talked about the receiver depth. A lot of receivers went. So I'm sure there's other guys on the board. There's that one slot receiver guy, I forgot his name, that I don't think went. He's on the
A.D.
table still.
Robinson.
No, I think it was a different guy.
Well, there's a couple left on the board. There's a few left.
Yeah, there's some guys left on the board, but a lot went. The other thing that I noted was that the Bills just traded out of the first round. So they decided to pass on taking a receiver. Went down to 32 because they traded with the Chiefs, and then they traded down again. So I don't know what they got back in return. But apparently they won a lot of picks. And then also hilariously, the first trade they did was with the Chiefs, and the Chiefs went up to get a receiver. So, I mean, in my opinion, the Bills are not even in the same conversation with the Chiefs in terms of a playoff game. I not a chance they would ever beat them. So, whatever. It is what it is, but it'll be funny, because I'm pretty sure the Bills were the team that traded with the Chiefs for Mahomes. Is that
That's
right?
correct. Yep.
And now they're trading for this receiver. It's just funny. So the Bills trading back twice. That was kind of interesting. And then some people noticed also the 49ers with the receiver they took. Apparently he's a very good route runner, and people thought the man coverage was kind of a little bit of, what got to them in the Super Bowl. So they're hoping to answer that there. Plus, maybe they'll come off a receiver. Just on the 49ers, I mean, it's kind of like the Hawks in a certain way, where like the guy you really want to come off of is Deebo Samuel. He's clearly the worst player, but also you're not going to get anything as much back for him. So, I mean, whatever. If I'm the Niners, I'm not moving off Ayuk. I'm moving off Samuel, even if I don't get much. his cap, his whatever his salary's gone, so that's cleared out, and he wasn't really making that big of an impact on the team last year. So I would not be moving up Brandon Ayuk. I would be trying to get Samuel off the books, even if it's not for much.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. Debo's kind of fell off a little bit. He had that dominant playoff win against the Cowboys a couple years back and kind of hasn't been the same. Obviously he takes a toll on his body the way he plays. I think also Jawan Jennings also on the last year of his deal, so that might be part of it. But I would not be shocked at all to see a Debo Samuel trade in the next, couple of weeks or months before the NFL season. And for a team, I think he could bring some value if you're getting him for a third round pick or fourth round pick potentially, whatever it is. He's definitely a talented player. But in terms of the 49ers, with having Brandon Ayuk and George Kittle and McCaffrey as an option and Jawan Jennings and a new
And
receiver in the first
Shanahan.
round and Kyle Shanahan orchestrating the plays, I don't think it would be a bad decision for them to get off. They're going to have to get rid of some money, especially if they're going to pay Purdy at some point, which we'll see if they're willing to do. But that is an interesting takeaway. The Bills thing is interesting, but it's also, we've seen them not really care about who they're trading their players to. They're just kind of getting the best offer. They traded Stephon Diggs to the Texans. That's not a great team for them to trade him to. They're another contender in the AFC. But it kind of seems like their philosophy is let's get the best package and go from there, which, I agree with to a certain extent, especially because the Bills, I agree with Ben, they're not really in that contender space anymore. I think they need a retool, kind of what the Chiefs did after getting rid of Tyreek Hill and bring in some new players, especially defensively. They got rid of a lot of starters this year, but the receiving core is not there. I think because of Josh Allen's greatness, I have him as the second best quarterback in the NFL. He's going to carry them to the playoffs. But that is interesting that they traded with the Chiefs again, especially after trading Mahomes to them ultimately, back in 2017. But I think we'll wrap things up with that. We'll see if we'll do another podcast Sunday. If not, it's probably going to have to wait till Wednesday, recapping some of the new NBA games, see if the Suns can do anything. The Clippers Mavs series. Let's see if the Nuggets sweep the Lakers, and maybe some more NFL draft stuff. Depending on what happens in the second and third round. But I think that was a good recap of the NBA playoffs and some of the NFL draft stuff. Ben, do you have anything else you wanted to add?
No, thank you for having me.
Not a problem. And don't forget to follow us on social media at the Agendas Pod, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and we'll see you guys on the next one.